Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to this session on sustaining sustainable transitions over the life course. My name is Nozi Pombanjwa and it is an absolute pleasure and a privilege to moderate today's session. And for those of you who are still looking to find your seats, can you kindly please find your seats so that we may proceed with the program? And this is a conversation, ladies and gentlemen, that promises to be robust. It promises to be deeply insightful with lots of rich inputs from our keynote speakers as well as our panelists. To kick us off this afternoon, I'd like to invite the Director General of the ILO, Mr. Guy Ryder, for his introductory remarks. Can we give him a round of applause?
Thank you, Nosi, Ministers. Dear Managing Director, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to all of you to this, our, I think, fourth thematic forum during our centenary conference. And this one, as you've just heard, is about securing sustainable transitions over the life course. And people are facing multiple transitions throughout their working lives, school to work, changing between jobs, things, increasingly taking multiple jobs over their working life, moving into retirement, and sometimes, as aging societies come more into being in many countries, returning again, sometimes late in life, to the labour market. And the challenges of these transitions is, of course, compounded by the context of technological, environmental, demographic, and other global transformations which are underway. So supporting people through the various transitions that they face during their lives, it seems to us, is crucial to seizing the opportunities presented in these processes of change. And it is, I think, equally important to ensure adequate opportunities for decent work for all of those who seek it, because only then can the ILO's goals of delivering economic security, equal opportunity, and social justice for all be achieved. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to open this session, we are truly honoured and delighted to welcome Madame Christine Lagarde, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, who is about to make her keynote address. My notes say that Madame Lagarde needs no introduction, and then I have an introduction. So I'm in something of a dilemma. So suffice to say that Madame Lagarde is known to us all in the international community, a global leader amongst global leaders with enormous knowledge and experience of the world economy, the ways that financial architecture shapes the lives of individuals and countries across the globe. And on this particular day here in Switzerland, as is noted, Madame Lagarde is, of course, the first woman to hold the post of Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. I shouldn't say this, but that's 1-0 to the International Monetary Fund, because the ILO so far has had 10 male Directors General, not something I say to my advantage. Madame Lagarde will speak to us today about, and I quote, forging a stronger social contract, the IMF's approach to social spending. And I think that that topic is entirely fitting as the ILO marks its centenary and continues its own commitment and quest to achieve universal social protection. Let me quote the figure that I think we all know. 55% of the world's population is still not covered by social protection. And the global commitment to universal social protection is a prerequisite to securing sustainable transitions over the life course. Can I add that later during the session this afternoon, we will also listen to Madame Michelle Bachelet, the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we have with us too an exceptional lineup of panelists who have been invited to share their perspectives on the crucial topic of securing sustainable transitions from the different perspectives that they will bring. So that's all I have to say. You're not waiting to hear me. You're waiting to hear the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, and I have pleasure in inviting Madame Lagarde to the lectern.
Thank you so much, Guy, for having limited your introduction in the way you did. It's wonderful. And thank you very, very much for inviting me and members of the IMF team as well on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the institutions. Good afternoon to all of you, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It is a real privilege to be here with you in this magnificent Palais des Nations, with this superb ceiling above our head. Now, at this point in time, if I was true to my colors, I would actually turn my back to you and express in that way the fact that I'm actually on strike. But you might be disappointed, so instead of this, I'm actually wearing this little sign out of solidarity with the Swiss women who actually claim equality in terms of salaries and a few other things on this particular day today. So to my friend at the ILO, happy centennial and congratulations, because for 100 years you have served the noble cause of social partnership and social justice. And when I think about it, actually there is a real parallel between the ILO and the IMF. Some of you might doubt it, but pause for a second and remember when you were set up, 1919. With clearly at the time, after the First World War, the premise was that there would be no lasting peace if there was no social justice. Now think about us at the IMF. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary, so we are a little younger, but we were equally founded right after the Second World War actually during the Second World War, because the first signature took place in 1944, and we were set up right after the Second World War on the premise that lasting peace is founded on economic cooperation between nations. So it was with this lasting peace in mind and the well-being of our fellow human beings that both institutions were founded. You bring together the social partners in the service of ensuring decent work for all, knowing, as we do, that decent work is not just about a paycheck, but also a source of meaning, purpose, dignity, self-esteem, and respect. We bring together 189 nations of the world in the service of promoting financial stability and sustainable and inclusive growth. Now bear with me on that, sustainable and inclusive growth, because I will come back to that in relation to what we are debating. And in this context, my topic today, social spending, could not be more relevant. Relevant to both our institution and relevant to the challenges that we are facing at the moment. First of all, as any good reformed lawyer that I am, I would like to start with the definition of the terms that I'm using. And you will note that I'm not using the terms social protection, I'm using social spending. And by social spending, we mean social insurance, social assistance, as well as public spending on health and education. So social spending, as you can see, is a broader concept than social protection, because it includes those spending on health and on education, which are especially critical, particularly in low-income countries and developing countries. And in our mind, there is no doubt that these programs are vital for promoting the well-being of citizens and social cohesion. Public pension makes the whole difference between aging in poverty and aging with dignity. Healthcare does not only save life, but it extends life and it improves the quality of life. primary and secondary education gives our youngest citizens the opportunity to reach their full potential and to contribute to society. At a deeper level, I would argue that social spending is a core component of the social contract that is needed to fulfill the mission of our respective institutions. This is not new. The importance of providing financial security to citizens to keep peace and foster harmonious social relationships is probably as old as civilizations. It is a lesson that was learned also during the Industrial Revolution as politicians responded to new social and political challenges with different forms of social protection. Think, for instance, of the Bismarckian reforms in Germany. It is a lesson that was learned after the darkest days of 1930s. The famous economic historian Barry Heisengreen makes a very convincing case that the vastly different political path taken by Germany and by the United Kingdom over that decade was at least partly attributable to the UK better functioning unemployment insurance scheme in the face of crippling unemployment. And it is a lesson learned in the post-war era when the 3 decades of strong and shared growth in the advanced economies that we call the Les Trente Glorieuses were underpinned by an accompanying social contract with broad participation and widespread social and political support. So what this tells us is that for economies to be resilient and for growth to be sustainable, a word that I mentioned earlier on, it needs to be inclusive, which itself calls for social spending. And this, in turn, provides the social and political buy-in for growth-supporting policies, and in doing so, develops and strengthens trust. So the bottom line is pretty simple. Social spending matters. It matters today, as we are bombarded by new challenges as much as it mattered in the past when our societies went through crisis. The new challenges, I'm sure you've heard them ad nauseum. It is the growing number of retirees. It is the growing number of young people who are unemployed. It is climate change. It is the impact of new technologies on work and wages. It is rising inequality, which is prevalent in the majority of the countries in the world, particularly in the last 20 years. It is barriers to women who seem to be resilient to any particular PR approach or social fights. It is the existential threat of climate change. It is diminishing trust and rising discontent. And it is in some corner a turn away from global cooperation that multilateralism has embraced and needs to continue to embrace. There is no simple policy response to these complex challenges, and yet we are convinced that social spending is one of the responses, not the only one, but certainly one of them, and an important one. And it is no surprise that surveys indicate rising public support for income redistribution policies in many countries. Social spending, therefore, must take its rightful place in the center of our macroeconomic policy discussion. And it is with that introduction in mind that I would like to now address what we are actually launching formally today, which is the new IMF strategy on engaging in social spending issues. And it is being published today. You can consult on our internet website. It is available for those of you who would like to have hard copy, and it's something that I was very proud to hand over to Guy as work that we have produced, but that you have helped us produce, because there was a lot of engagement and cooperation between our institutions when we consulted others in order to go in the right path. There are multiple factors why we are going in that direction and why we are adopting this new strategy. Let me give you a few examples of the reasons. Number one, many more of our members actually become increasingly concerned over the necessary social spending and how public spending can be most efficiently used in that respect. For instance, our analysis has found that high inequality this is the analytical and research work that we've done, which has actually fueled the reasons why we're heading in that direction. Number one, our research clearly indicates that excessive inequality undermines sustainable growth yet again. Our research has also found that public investment in health and education boosts productivity and growth and reduces inequality of opportunity and inequality of income. Likewise, our research shows that social spending programs that redistribute from higher income to lower income groups can decrease poverty and inequality. It seems quite obvious, but when you have strong economists with good macroeconomic background belonging to an institutions that, historically has been mostly focused on fiscal, that actually demonstrate that it's extremely important not only for us as an institution, but also for the geopolitical environment in which we operate and for some of those who are not necessarily convinced of those obvious results. Our research also shows that they can increase the resilience, social spending can increase the resilience of lower income households. It can increase their resilience to economic shocks, including shocks coming from technology and shocks coming from climate change as well. At the country level, because we had to do our homework as well, as any institution does, we realized, after having done a proper survey, that about 80% of our staff in the fields was actually convinced that social spending had a macro-critical dimension and therefore warranted being part and parcel of the work that they were doing in the fields in any of those 189 countries that we have in the membership. So for all these reasons, the concern of our membership, the analytical work and the body of work that we have done, and the strong consent and support of our staff in the fields, and a little bit of leadership push as well, let's face it, although credit doesn't matter in this particular case, we went in the direction of exploring how we could actually give strength to these social spending principles and the strategy that was going to be derived from that. So we stepped up our engagement on social spending at country level. For example, and I'll give you 3 examples, we helped Ghana create the fiscal space to increase spending on public education so that it could achieve its goal of universal secondary education. Second, we helped Japan develop options for pension reform so necessary in an aging society. In Cyprus, we helped the government strengthen the social safety net during a time of severe crisis when the country was under program, including with the introduction of a new guaranteed minimum income program. Final example, which I love to mention because it's actually working, in Jamaica, we supported the expansion of social assistance programs during a period of unbelievable and necessary belt tightening. So in all these programs that I have mentioned, we have focused on the fiscal efficiency, sustainability and adequacy in order to serve the purpose that was pursued by those countries. In the program that we have had, protecting the poor and the vulnerable is now and will from now on constitute one of our core objectives. Now, you don't necessarily hear a lot about it because this is not what is of interest to the financial observers who generally comment on our programs. They are most interested in the fiscal outcome by way of closing the deficit or redressing the current account balance. They don't look into the weeds of our programs. And the most vulnerable and the poorest don't generally have much of a voice. But I can assure you that if you look into these programs, it is there and it is helpful. At the same time, in addition to the policy advice, in addition to the programs, we also provide technical assistance to countries to help them raise more domestic revenue. Domestic revenue, very simple, raising tax, essentially. Now, why is that? Because we've also calculated the massive gap that there is, particularly for low-income and developing countries, in order to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of money is going to be needed for them to reach the SDGs by 2030. On average, for low-income and developing countries, we're talking about an additional 15% of GDP spent annually by those countries. So clearly, they need the technical assistance and they need the institutional depth in order to raise those revenue levels, which will not be enough, by the way. There will have to be other sources of financing from private sector, from international organizations, from any sources in order to help them get there. And I very much welcome the cooperation that we can institute between the ILO and the IMF in order to really deepen our advice and our cooperation in that respect. We've just discussed that, Guy and myself, with our respective teams. It is clear then that social spending is not just an expense, but rather can be among the wisest investment in the well-being of our societies. Expansion of access to education and health generates broader productivity across population, allowing all citizens to flourish. To reap the rewards of a stronger global economy tomorrow, societies must begin strengthening their social programs today. Now, this doesn't sound very much like IMF talk, does it? And some of you have probably repressed that little smile inside themselves, thinking, yeah, is she really serious about that? Yes, we are serious, actually, but we cannot play the role of Pangloss either. And in the real world, the best of intentions run up against the firmest budget constraints. So how do we navigate that? How do we move forward? And that's where actually we had a lot of debates with the board of the IMF that represents the entire international community, where lots of views are exchanged. So we had to be very specific. And we had to start from the premise that social spending needs to be adequate, yet must also be efficient and must be financed sustainably. So it's spending adequacy, spending efficiency, fiscal sustainability. And those are the three yardsticks against which we can actually define the macro criticality of social spending and be able to actually push those through in the analytical work that we do, in the policy recommendations that we give, and in the program that we design with countries. And we believe that this strategy will lead to more effective IMF involvement and engagement on social spending issues, and to strengthen the quality and the consistency of our policy advice. It collects best practices gleaned from years of engagement on social spending, and lays out a clear roadmap for consistently applying the best practices to our engagement. So what will we do from here? Because that strategy has now been approved by the board of the IMF, and our staff in the fields, working hand in hand with other institutions, will be able, without remorse, shame or fear, to actually explore by these three yardsticks how social spending can be helpful. But it's a little bit vague. So what we're going to do in the next 18 months is actually produce the guidelines so that staff, when they go in the field, know exactly how they can go about this, and it will be underpinned by the work that we will produce, reaching out to other institutions such as the ILO, such as other members of the international community that are competent, that have experience in the field of social spending. What will that result in? Augmented tools that they can use when they go out in the fields, better and stronger databases, because you have to be able to measure in order to use those yardsticks, ongoing analytical work, background notes on issues such as pensions, such as social assistance, education and health. And our strategies should ensure that our engagement is more consistent and hopefully more effective, and also better tailored to the country specificity of each situation. The third pillar of what I have just described is actually the one that I call the partnership. And partnership for success is going to actually require that together with an institution like the ILO, but also like the World Bank, which is across the street from the IMF, we actually work together in terms of research, in terms of identifying our guidelines going forward, and in terms of work done in the field. So, we have done that to produce this paper. We had a broad consultation with international institutions, with academics, with NGOs as well, and it has really demonstrated to us that a close cooperation and close engagement with others is actually extremely valuable. You have much more significant expertise in social spending than we do. And we can help as well. We can sort of cross-fertilize each other and enhance our respective expertise, because we bring a lot in terms of fiscal assessment, in terms of crisis resolution, in terms of restructuring in many corners. And I think that we can really, holding hands, do a better job together. So, as I said, there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to designing social spending programs to reduce poverty, to boost inclusion, to protect vulnerable households. Countries will have different preferences. Political leaders will have their choice. We can make recommendations, we can make prescriptions, but at the end of the day, it is the countries that actually deliver. It is a government that is actually taking the responsibility. So we can shout from the top of the roof as much as we want that social spending is good, that social spending is a must, and that it delivers this, that and the other, and that the fiscal preference should be about social spending. At the end of the day, they call the shot, and they are accountable to their voters. We have to bear that in mind as well. But I believe that as institutions, we have an obligation to all members of society, and particularly to those whose voices are not heard, to the poor, to the most vulnerable, to those who are lonely and who bear a burden that clearly requires the help of others. So it is with that in mind that we are adopting and embarking on this new strategy. And I would like, by way of closing, to mention somebody who really liked the ILO in those days, and that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Great friend and supporter of the ILO at the time. Now, he may have been quoted already 10,000 times in the last week, but I will not refrain nonetheless. He said, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough to those who have too little." It's not just ethically right, it's economically justified. I thank you very much for your attention.
A very big thank you to Madame Lagarde for setting the context for this number of conversations, 2 conversations in particular, that we're going to transition into. And to build on some of her remarks, she reminded us, of course, of the global transformative changes that are influencing the world of work, whether this be digitalization, demographics, climate change, or even globalization. But ladies and gentlemen, just as we reiterated this morning, we know that these changes come with both opportunities, but they come with challenges as well. On the side of opportunities, we know that this is a moment where we could see the creation of new jobs, where we could increase access and inclusion in labor markets. In fact, this is an opportunity as well to increase productivity and incomes. But the reality is, as we surfaced this morning, is that this also presents a challenge, especially for those workers that are least prepared and least supported to undertake these transitions that we speak about over the life course. And again, the context of where the world is very important. This is happening at a time of deepening inequality around the world. So the conversation we are about to have now really looks at how decent job creation policies, together with strong and sustainable social protection systems, can support working people. And this includes young people, includes prime-age people, it includes aging men and women, and to support them through these multiple transitions. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'd like to also just remind you of the format that we're going to take. We're going to thank very much the Managing Director as she leaves. Thank you, Madam. Thank you. And to thank the Director General as well. Just a quick reminder, as before I introduce the panel, ladies and gentlemen, this is your conversation as well. So we're going to try our best to get to questions and answers in the session. Again, if you'd like to pose a question, I'll remind you, we'll be using the cards in front of you. And the final request from my side, if you could please just be mindful of the cameras. We are broadcasting live, so if you do get up from your seat, please be mindful that you're not walking in front of a camera. With that being said, I'd like to invite my panelists to please join me on stage. This afternoon, we have the privilege of having the Minister of Labor and Social Affairs from Uruguay, that's Minister Ernesto Muro, who joins us, and he's going to be taking his seat to my right. And next to him is Ms. Christine Alsos. She is a research director at FAFO and the project leader for the Future of Work project, this for the Nordic Council of Ministers. I'm going to ask my panelists to make their way up as I call them. Thank you very much. And next to Ms. Alsos is Mr. Paweł Wojciechowski. I think I've tried my very best with that one, sir. He is a Polish social insurance. He represents the Polish Social Insurance Institution and is also the advisor to the President of the Employers of Poland. On my left-hand side, I'd like to please invite Madame Rebecca Greenspan. She is, of course, the Secretary General of the Ibero-American Conference and member of the Global Commission. Welcome, Madame. Sitting next to her as well I would like to call upon a UN young leader that is using her voice to advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals. That's Ms. Joannie Marlene Bewa. Welcome, Joannie. And certainly last but not least is the General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation. That's Mr. Luca Vicentini, who joins me now on the panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get straight into the panel now. We've just heard from Ms. Lagarde, from my panelists, the importance of social spending, and in particular, how this impacts on inequalities and global stability. And so this brings us to what I'd call our first theme in the conversation, this theme of protection and rights. And Minister Muro, I'd love to start off by posing the question to you. How do we then, ladies and gentlemen, at this moment, we also have the privilege and the honor of being joined by the Commissioner for Human Rights. Madame Bachelet, welcome and thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing your remarks as well. So let me come back to the first question. So you've joined at a beautiful time as we start the conversation. And the first theme that we'd like to unpack is this idea of protection and rights. Minister Muro, what are your views on the economic and social policies, and in particular, how we should be thinking about designing these so that they really ensure the protection and rights of vulnerable workers and the communities which they come from?
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por darnos la oportunidad de participar en este importante evento y panel. Y creo que esta es una discusión que, en primer lugar, debe darse en cada país. Creo que tuvimos una época, allá por los 90, donde, por ejemplo, organismos multilaterales nos querían imponer determinadas recetas, y en muchos casos las impusieron, de cómo debíamos en cada uno de nuestros países hacer nuestros sistemas de protección social. Creo que esto debe cambiar. Lo estamos cambiando. Cada país debe hacer su sistema de acuerdo a sus realidades, con su democracia, para avanzar. Pero ese fue un periodo que hubo particularmente en nuestra América Latina y en parte de Europa Central y Oriental, y que ha tenido sus consecuencias. Esto que vemos hoy, donde a nivel mundial tenemos solamente 2.100 millones con protección integral y 5.200 millones con protección parcial o ninguna protección social, es un dato de los resultados que se han tenido en estos tiempos. Por ejemplo, en Europa Central y América Latina, a partir de esas recetas o de esos condicionamientos, se privatizó total o parcialmente 30 países. Hoy asistimos a una reversión de esas privatizaciones en 18 de esos 30 países. Y yo creo que cada país debe definir su destino, creando sistemas de protección social que sean sustentables, pero que tengan en cuenta que es un derecho humano fundamental, que tengan en cuenta el trabajo y las nuevas formas de trabajo, pero que no se aprovechen las nuevas formas de trabajo como las aplicaciones para sacar derechos y dejar a esos nuevos trabajadores fuera de los derechos de la protección social y laboral. Creo que tenemos que también ver el financiamiento tributario progresivo, porque muchas veces se hace financiar los sistemas de protección social con sistemas regresivos, donde muchas veces pagan los que no tienen derecho y los que más derechos tienen menos pagan para financiar esas protecciones. Creo que por allí, y para respetar el tiempo, me quedo. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Minister Muro. And I'd like to test some of the insights you've shared with us. You've spoken about each country developing its own system and determining its own destiny. And of course, for us to think about how do we go about financing some of these systems. I'd like to test this with Mr. Vincentini from the perspective of workers. So as we think about the economic and the social policies that are going to enable the protection and give rights to the most vulnerable, from a worker's perspective, what are the key ingredients that we need to be mindful of?
Well, I think that before discussing about policies, we should try to understand which are the problems and which are the categories of vulnerable people we have to address with solutions. So we are very often used to discuss about people we never met in our life. So to make this discussion a bit more lively, if you want, and to provoke a bit the audience, I would like to divide this room in two parts. The part on the left, let's say, are miners and steel workers. And the other part of the room, the part on the right, are platform workers and gig economy workers. The first vulnerable category is a category that will be affected in the oncoming years by climate change, by greening the economy, the need for greening the economy and cope with the challenges of the Paris Agreement, but also by automation processes. The other part of the room is, of course, addressed by completely different problems. Instability in the work relationship, but also not coverage of rights, no access to social protection. These two categories of workers have completely different problems. In the first category, the first problem they will face in the moment they will lose their job, because many of them will lose their job, the first problem they will have is that they will need to be reskilled to enter a new job. The second problem they will have is that they will need very robust and universal unemployment benefit systems to cover them in the period of transition. But these two elements are not enough, because you can accompany people, you can assist them, you can provide them with new skills, but if they cannot find another job, they will be fantastically upskilled, unemployed people. So it's clear that for them, the first problem will be how we can create new quality jobs that can replace the jobs that have been destroyed. And leave this question for the moment, we will address it later. Let's take the other category, the platform workers. They don't need any upskilling. Very often they are even overskilled for the kind of job they are performing. They need, of course, to have access to social protection. And they need also to be covered by the same protection and rights as the other workers in the workplace or at work, let's say, although the workplace for them very often is a very unclear concept. But also in this case, there is a precondition to have access to all this. And it's the fact that to be able to join a social protection system, making this social protection system sustainable for them, they have, first of all, to have a decent remuneration. Because if you don't have a decent remuneration, how can you pay social contribution to the social protection system? And the large majority, maybe 90% of the platform workers and the gig economy workers receive a salary that is below the minimum wage of the country where they live and work. And it's clear there is another obstacle for them, the last one, but probably the most tricky one, and it's the fact that these workers, although they are workers, they are considered self-employed entrepreneurs by the competition law. And so for them, having access to a trade union, having access to collective bargaining to bargain their remuneration, it's impossible. And this is probably the major problem we will have to address in the future. So I didn't list any policy for the moment. We will discuss later about policies, but at least we need to focus problems if we want to provide the right policies for the future.
So, Mr. Vincentini, what I'm seeing is Madame Greenspan nodding her head as you're speaking, and I know she's going to come in and bring her voice on how we begin to aggregate and make sure that we're tailoring the policy responses. But before I get to Madame Greenspan to bring that view, I quickly just want to come to Mr. Pavel, just to test this idea of how we're thinking about social and economic policies from the perspective of the employers. So what are the key things that you think we need to be mindful of?
Well, I'm so glad that I am speaking after Luca, because I think that we should, as a point of departure, we should really think about what we can have in common between employers, among employers and workers. And in fact, what we can agree on and what we can push to the governments for his advice, in social, as a social partners. I think one thing that comes out at first is that there's no disagreements about this. We have to improve business climate because investments, jobs are created by businesses, And this is the task which is, from my point of view, is a low-hanging fruit to the governments. Just take it and use it. And there's plenty of standards to use it all around the world. Second, of course, is the resource mobilization, which is formality of the job market. We know that in developing countries, we have between 35 to 90% of people working in formal markets. That's, of course, creates issues for fiscal resources, but creates problems for pensions, which are based on contributions. Third, of course, we have to aim at skills, which aim at employability, matching labor demand with particular training. And who better than employers and workers understand what need to be trained, how to upskill, how to reskill. The government should understand that this bottom-up initiative should be very much supported, incentivized to bring people to work. Fourth, of course, Madame Lagarde has said, it's quite interesting that the social dimension understood has an economic rationale.
Yeah.
Social policy is not about losers. It's about social justice. We are in the house of social justice, but it's not only about social justice, it's about economics.
Yeah.
It's about fact that, of course, you mentioned that adequate, efficient fiscal sustainability, but also we have to remember about fiscal automatic stabilizers. We have to remember about incentive to work, that are being provided by economic policies, by social policies, and bridging rather than responding just to appeals for social safety nets. And last but not least, I would say the litmus test.
Yeah.
Talking about Africa, I mean, 10 to 12 million people, young people, entering the job market every year. We need to think how to turn this demographic challenge into the dividend, creating jobs with all the things that I've said.
So I suspect that Joanne might have some views on how we might do this for young Africans. But before we get to Joanne, Madame Greenspan, I do want to bring your voice in, because if we look at the work that you've been doing as part of the member of the World Commission, you've been quite vocal about speaking about the fact that transitions have different effects on different people at different points. And this, for me, tallies with the comment that Mr. Vincentini made earlier, to truly understand the nuances of the problem that we're dealing with. Can you just very briefly elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first say that we are talking about the transition. I am of the view that we are working and answering your question from the point of view of a transition to a world with jobs and work, not to a world of jobless growth. And from that standpoint, we have to answer the question, because there is a discussion on this. And so I will answer this thinking that we can have a good expansion of employment and that we are going to have growth with employment. So, but in that transition, different groups will live it in a different way. So first, what we have to do is go beyond what we call the tyranny of averages.
Yeah.
We have to understand how this transition is affecting different groups at the same time in a different way. By age, by gender, by regional living, by countries. And so we will need to have the information and put attention to the realities of the different groups. That's the first point. My second point that was very important in the report is that you have to protect workers, not jobs. And that's where you were going to, I think. We need universal social protection, and we need universal or a new right in terms of lifelong training, because you will have to change your jobs many times during your labor life. And so you need to put training in the center also of the answer. Third, I would say you have to change the narrative from fear and defensiveness to a narrative of proactive policies. And I think that this is very important, because fear is so deep right now of losing jobs in people. And all we hear is a world that will lose 40% of the jobs that we have right now. So let's concentrate on proactive policies, proactive labor policies, and proactive productive policies, because it's not only what people have inside them in terms of skills in the labor market. You need opportunities to match capacities too. So that is the second part of it. It's not only on the education or training side that we have to do things. We have to do things also in the productive structure. So decent employment and opportunities are also available for those that have to transition.
So, Ms. Bewa, I think your voice is definitely needed in the conversation at this point. We've spoken about, or just touched on from Mr. Bewa, the opportunity from the African demographics of translating the demographics into a demographic dividend. We've understood from Mr. Vincentini as well, from Secretary Greenspan, that there are real nuances that we need to think about. The question to you is, what do social and economic policies have to look like for them to work for young people?
Thank you for this question. I think it has just been mentioned that we need to have proactive and productive policies. And I think more importantly, we also need to make sure that we have inclusive policies that not just build on including the most vulnerable, but also hearing the voice, the needs, and the aspirations of young people. More specifically, we have young professionals, we have young women, we have young people in rural and urban area, we have people who are vulnerable. How do we make sure that the policies or the interventions that are in place are really inclusive and reach them? The second point that I'm seeing is also make it work also means that we have in place systems and frameworks that definitely support those who are in the informal economy and try to bridge the gap and bring them into the formal economy. Making it work is also looking at how we can support those who are entrepreneurs, because it's not said that everyone has to be salaried in a company. Those who are entrepreneurs, how can they have an ecosystem that is enabling, that support the risks that they are taking? Because being an entrepreneur is taking a positive risk, right? That can be productive at some point. But last but not the least, as it has been said, we cannot address what we cannot measure.
Yeah.
So we also need to make sure that data capture the youth, the professional that are not in a formal system, but are left behind. So I think those are key insights that I can share.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bell. So the big job of moving us to the end of this session before we call on Madame Bachelet rests on you, Ms. Alassos, because as a researcher, I'd like to use your experience to test all of these ideas that have come from the panel. We've heard that social and economic policies must be inclusive, they must be productive, they must be tailored, they must be free from the tyranny of the averages. We've heard that they need to be responsive to context. We need to understand the problem that we're trying to solve for. They need to be a bridge. And what we've heard from Ms. Bewa now is that they need to be measurable. Now, you do a lot of research in this space. Does the research tally with what you're hearing from your fellow panelists?
Thank you for this very easy question I had, I must say. I think, the description of the problems is very to the point, I think, and also some of the solutions from the other side, and what you raised with social dialogue, that you should come together and to talk and to find solutions. I think that's the most important one, to have strong social partners and to have strong relations between the social partners. And that's probably not a very surprise. I'm coming from Nordic countries and with a Nordic perspective on things. So I would say that the social dialogue is really important in order to address these problems.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it appears that from what we've heard in the panel, as we've started looking at the themes of protection and rights, the themes of jobs and transition, that it comes back to social dialogue. And this is what we're hearing from the panelists, but this is what the research is also surfacing. I think this is a beautiful place for us to now call upon, for our next keynote, Madame Bachelet, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. And in her keynote, she is going to focus on transitions in the world of work, and in particular, looking at rights and policies. And this is really going to add another layer to the conversation that we're having here. So may we give her a round of applause to welcome her up onto stage. Madame Bachelet, please.
Distinguished chairs, distinguished fellow panelists, excellencies, colleagues, friends. I am pleased for this opportunity to discuss the need for sustainable transitions in the world of work, because we have so many transformative changes taking place. So it's fundamental that we shape the future of work with laws and policies which uphold the fundamental principles and standards of human rights. So let me make 3 points. First of all, today we live in an extremely unequal world. The growing gap between rich and poor is not only an economic issue, but a social issue, a political issue, and fundamentally a question of justice and human rights. Secondly, and I've heard the panelists speak about this, the demographic shifts are changing our societies. With youth population expanding in many parts of the world, there were 70 million young people unemployed in 2017. And in fact, young people are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, the population is rapidly aging, and this aging society is putting increased pressure on labor markets and systems for social protection. And thirdly, technological advances, including artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, are creating new jobs while eliminating others. People who are ill-equipped for the transition will be affected more severely. And often, these are people who already face discrimination. Artificial intelligence, when based on biased assumptions, may also entrench harmful stereotypes, feeding more discrimination. As a matter of fact, we are working a lot on technology and human rights, and there's a lot of companies who have had this platform for recruiting people, and they discover through artificial intelligence that they were biased in two bias: gender bias and skin type bias with Afro descendant. And that is because developers mainly are white men, and they incorporate their own bias on the artificial intelligence. So it's important. We're working with the companies on these issues. So how can we manage the fact of change and shift these in transformative forces so that they generate benefits for everyone? I highlighted 3 shifts. Let me highlight 3 solutions. I know the problem is much more complex, but we don't have much time. So one, it is crucial to invest in people's right to education, to combat inequalities, and to achieve decent work for all. But here we have 2 problems, because a startling number of young people are neither in education, technical or vocational training, nor employment. But at the same time, you have countries where the young people have had professional education, university education, but the markets and the employment possibilities are not, how could I say, coupled with the education. So we have in education many challenges. And we also, I don't think many countries are focusing on access to education, but are not thinking if the Industrial Revolution 4.0 is related to the education we're giving to those young people today. So children today will going to be equipped for the revolution, industrial revolution for tomorrow, for the future. But meanwhile, older people find it difficult to access this necessary training to adapt and to re-enter the labor market. And I've been speaking to countries where they have very little population, aging population, and they have the need to reconvert their people to new kind of realities because they don't have enough workers and they need them to be part of the working class. So to ensure that no one is left behind, states need to invest more in lifelong learning. They need to scale up solutions for experimental and practical learning, develop vocational training based on labor market demand with an emphasis on new technologies, establish public-private sector partnership for apprenticeship, and provide much better guidance to people of all ages on the academic and vocational opportunities open to them. 2, women's rights and gender equality are key to decent work. For a sustainable transition and just future of work, women need to be fully empowered and able to exercise their rights and make their own decisions at home and across society as well as at work. Well, today, the 14th of June 2019, women in Switzerland are striking to protest abuses and gender inequality in the realm of work and beyond. Globally, the gender pay gap is estimated to be around 23%. Currently, 704 million women make their living in the informal economy. The demands of unpaid care work often force women into informal jobs with precarious employment status and no access to social insurance benefits, including pensions. So we need comprehensive and coherent approaches that cut across several policy areas. To achieve access to decent work for women, half the population, we need gender-sensitive social protection systems that tackle women's unpaid work. We need far-reaching education to eradicate harmful gender stereotypes, promoting the rights of women and girls to make their own choices, and the need for shared family responsibility for work in the home. We need to reduce the heavy burden of unpaid care work, which women carry all their lives. So we need all this and more. 3, human rights-based policies effectively uphold workers' rights and guarantee social protection. When navigating transitions, states should use their maximum available resources to ring-fence budgets, to ensure that rights are protected, including the right to decent work and the right to social protection. That essential services remain accessible even in economic downturns. And it can be done. We did in our country, creating some special funds so in the times where there were downturns, you could have the available resources to continue with social protection. And social protection is a fundamental human right. It is also an essential safety net for society, especially when technological advances are accompanied by temporary or permanent job losses and widespread anxiety. By mitigating the negative impact of unemployment, creating access to further education, improving labor market opportunities, and securing access to at least the core contents of the right to health, food, water and sanitation, education and housing, social security systems can ensure that individuals and all of society are protected from the worst impact of upheavals. Universal social protection systems that contribute to gender equality, respect human rights, and protect marginalized groups such as children, older persons, persons with disabilities, informal workers, migrants, are effective and they are feasible. And the ILO has estimated the cost, and the cost is not that high. A number of countries, both developed and developing, have established universal social protection and can speak to the very powerful effect these systems can have in curbing poverty and marginalization, reinvigorating the economy, and upholding human dignity. When I became president of Chile, I knew the biggest task we faced was making Chilean society more inclusive, undoing discrimination and inequalities, which force so many people to the margins of society. So we need to focus much more on spreading economic growth and making sure they benefit a much wider group of people with better services and strong focus on early child development. We made it possible for all students in Chile, women and men, to obtain not only primary and secondary, but also university education free of charge for 70% of students at the universities. We worked to provide wider public childcare so that mothers could work, but also child could develop in the best possible way. We made reforms to ensure more representation of women in political parties and in parliament and in boards and public companies. So these measures, just to mention some and many others, build a stronger economic base, but their impact also extends much more broadly across society. And human rights are the drivers of peace, security, confidence, resilience, and public trust. Inclusive, participatory societies benefit from the skills of all, of everyone. And when essential services are provided, such as adequate and accessible health care, education and housing, everyone reaps massive economic, political, and social benefits. Excellencies, friends, a century ago, in the wake of the First World War, the ILO was created, and I quote, in the conviction that social justice is essential to universal and lasting peace, end of quote. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drawn up amid the devastation of the Second World War, and many of its articles are clearly inspired by the international standards and common values the ILO had developed. Today, at a time of growing turbulence in the world, the fundamental rights and principles that underpins decent work can be our proven guide to navigating the multiple transitions we face in the world of work. The 2030 Agenda is a roadmap to prosperous, peaceful, and resilient society on a healthy planet. It can only be achieved with human rights-based policies and programs which ensure that people will benefit from the life-improving promises of technology. So we have the tools, we have the map, we can afford to enable everyone to live in dignity. It's time for action. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, a very clear message. We have the tools, we have the map. It is time for action. Before I come back to my panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank very much Madame Bachelet for her speech. If we could give her a round of applause as she departs. Thank you. And I'd like you to please turn your attention to the screen. We have a short video address from Mr. Akim Steiner, administrator at the UNDP. Can we turn our focus to the screens? Thank you very much.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Director General, my dear friend Guy, I would like to extend my warmest congratulations to the International Labour Organization on its 100th anniversary. It is a wonderful occasion to celebrate the ILO's exceptional history and its unique constituency model. The people-centered recommendations of the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work now provide us with a much-needed framework to plot out the many challenges but also opportunities that lie ahead in this crucial area. They touch on how to improve the quality of working lives for the 300 million working poor and the 193 million unemployed, often a focus of our work in UNDP too. by tackling issues such as substandard employment conditions and gender disparities. If these challenges are left unattended, it will lead to further marginalization, frustration, and inequality. The United Nations Development Programme enjoys a long-standing and close working relationship with the ILO, and Guy and I have both made it a priority to bring together our thinking on development from the perspective of both employment and sustainable development in the broader context. Indeed, as we aim to meet all 17 Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030, we need to listen closely to the guidance of the ILO and its constituencies. That means pivoting in order to respond to this complex and challenging period. That is clearly evidenced by the advent of yet another wave of technology, as well as other challenges such as climate change and demographic shifts that will fundamentally alter labor markets of the future and the SDGs. In particular, the digital transformation requires our close attention. In my capacity as a co-chair of the UN Secretary-General's Task Force on Digital Finance and the SDGs, we are examining how technology models and platforms can become more citizen-centered. As the UN's development arm, UNDP focuses on how development policies, decisions, and pathways can shape the possibilities for people to operate in these future economies and, yes, societies. We are committed to continue engaging with the ILO and through the ILO with all of you in this process and following through on the recommendations of the Global Commission. These include a call to action to recognize a minimum set of rights for workers regardless of contract type or working status, guaranteed social protection from birth to old age, and the need to lift structural barriers that undermine women's equal participation in the workplace. In your deliberations on the 100th anniversary of the ILO, we must recognize that the role of labor markets is not only to provide labor to capital and its markets, but it is to ensure that labor and capital co-create and enable societies and economies in which we all want to live. In that respect, the ILO continues to be a beacon for getting the fundamentals right, by putting people, citizens, front and center when it comes to shaping how tomorrow's labor markets and jobs will look like. As you may be tempted on your 100th anniversary to think about retirement, let me just send you my best wishes and also my very strong wish that we need you to continue your work. So 100th is not a reason to retire, but rather to look forward to the future with the kind of commitment and leadership that so many of you and those who have gone before you have shown. On behalf of all of us and us here in the UNDP family, thank you and happy anniversary.
So as we come out of that message, I think what is clear is that retirement is not on the cards. So it's 100 not out. We need to keep going. But maybe dovetailing into the comments that we've heard from Mr. Steiner as well as Madame Bachelet, which is quite important, that labor and capital should be working together to create the societies that we actually want to live in. And as I come back to my panel, I'd like to very quickly touch on three short themes. The theme of skills, because we cannot have this conversation in the absence of that. The theme of technology, and I'd like to close it on the theme of governance. And so maybe a good place to start is maybe to come to you first, Ms. Bewa. And the question I'd like to bring to you is, maybe could you share with us how jobs and skills mismatches that we've been speaking about impact the goal of decent work, especially for young people?
Thank you. I think it's definitely impact the access to decent job in so many ways. So you just mentioned the skill mismatch, where the skill or the education system do not necessarily provide the skill that is needed on the job market. And that actually puts young people in a position where they cannot connect with the labor market. They cannot use an expertise, a skill that is needed. But also, it puts young people in a place where, looking at the fact that there is the lack of job, we see so many young people not being employed, not being in education, or not being in training. But we also see a lot of them being vulnerable in the informal sector. For example, West Africa, that I'm very familiar with, are doing a lot of progress to bring more young people into secure and quality and satisfactory job. But I think there is then an opportunity, which is the technological change, and I think it has been mentioned by Mrs. Bashley as well. How can we tap into the opportunity that technology can represent? Do you know that the two main domains that are recruiting young people, both in developing and developed country, are financial services and health sector? So myself as a physician, I can really identify to that because there are so many young professionals like me who are working in the health sector. But those two sectors are also very technology heavy and technology savvy. So how can we use that opportunity of these key sectors, recruiting a lot of young people, but also use the opportunity to build the skills of young people, being technology savvy, and then be actually the driver of the change into this topic. Another thing that I would also like to emphasize on is that young people, they are ready to learn. They want to earn out of the potential that they're bringing to the table, but they also want to return. So how can we make bold commitment? How can we move beyond commitment to actions? How can we move beyond commitment to key investment and make that triple of young people willing to learn, to earn and return a reality? And more importantly, match the skill that is needed in the market with the education system that we are providing. That's the $1 billion question, and we are here for that.
So on the $1 billion question, this Ms. Bewa has put on the table, the opportunity, and I want to bring this to you, Mr. Pavel, as well as Ms. Alosis. She says it's a $1 billion question. She says, how do we use technology to more effectively match what the labor market is looking for and the skills that are required by the labor market? She says, remember that young people want to learn, they want to earn, and they want to see the returns on the table as well. So your thoughts on the use of technology to close the gap between the skills required and what is coming out of the labor market?
Well, first, I guess we have to comment on just the effect of technology on the job market. As you know, there's this quotient of technological unemployment originally brought by Keynes. And of course, this fear of segmentation, segregation of people having the low-paid, low-skilled jobs versus high-paid, high-skilled jobs, and others with no jobs. So, of course, no jobs is not an option, and probably there will be just changing jobs. So we have to be humble with regard to this question. I would say that we need to think what kind of jobs would it be. My boy tells me I want to be influencer or some chatbot, trainer or something. Who you wanted to be when you were young? I wanted to be a priest. Okay, that was simple. Now that life has changed. So I think talking about young, I think we have to understand that we ought to not to be just mentors to the young, but we ought to learn from the young to understand what they are driving to. So this psychological effect of Generation Z, we call it the IG gene, this is quite interesting, and you can say that you have this VUCA generation, the volatile, uncertain, changing, and ambitious, and some of them having the fears, especially in the West, in some of the developed countries, of this FOGA type of people, which they have a fear of going out, and so on and so forth. So I think we have to be humble as employers and understand that we have to be more flexible and get down to some of these psychological issues, and understand what the people are driving to, because the jobs will be changing. But we have to provide them upskilling, reskilling, use e-learning, get them on cloud jobs, whatever. We have to be innovative, as try to offer them through technology. But at the same time, we have to tame robots. I mean, not the robots taming us and controlling us, but we have to control robots and tame them, tame them in a sense that the robots equipped with artificial intelligence cannot overtake. So we have more decent relationship when the robot invade our workplace. So altogether, it's a big challenge, and we have to be very, very innovative.
Right, so some strong thoughts on technology there, but I think bringing in an interesting angle in terms of going back to humility, going back to the base of addressing the psychological issues, but practically leveraging e-learning and innovation in general, and of course, thinking about the integration of robots practically in the workplace. Now, these are some of the thoughts from Mr. Pavel, but Ms. Alos, I'd love to get your sense. The billion-dollar question that was raised by Ms. Bewa is, how do we use technology more effectively to make sure that there's a smaller gap, an increasingly smaller gap between the skills and the jobs that are required?
Yeah, I will come to that, but I think from a Nordic perspective, I mean, we have already been through much of this transition. I mean, we have lost many jobs due to digitalization and automation already, and the prediction for the coming years on the job losses are much lower than if you look to the United States, for instance, and other countries. And I think one decisive factor in this picture is that the trade unions, they haven't feared the new technology. They have wanted the new technology, right, because they're really afraid of losing competitiveness, and they've seen and experienced that new technology also create new jobs. But I think one important point is that you can't leave it to technology alone, because you have to have policies and you have to support job creation, and support the capital is led into job creation and not into properties or financial markets and so on. And when it comes to the $1 billion question about training, I think it's important to link training closer to business, as is also pointing at. Both the formal education, like vocational training, and more workplace training, but it's also, I think, you need some kind of coordinated policies in order to ensure that business want to invest in these skills and training, because it costs more than it pays off for the single company. So you have to have some coordination at a more national level.
So you're bringing us to the national level, and that brings us to the theme of governance. And I'd love to build on that with you, Minister Moreau. And in particular, when we think about governance, what governance processes do you think could assist governments and social partners in building a strong consensus as we look to enable positive transformation change and look to enable a lot of the aspirations that have been shared by the panel?
Soy el único integrante del panel que soy un hombre de gobierno, orgullosamente un hombre de gobierno de mi país. Y los hombres de gobierno tenemos que tomar decisiones políticas y ejecutar. Y permítame, por ejemplo, que creo que tenemos que pensar, no puedo evadir alguna pregunta anterior. Creo que hay quienes a veces nos quieren asustar con esto del que las nuevas tecnologías van a eliminar empleos. Y muchas veces esos mismos todavía no han corregido en sus países los problemas que tienen los empleos más antiguos del mundo. No han mejorado el trabajo de los trabajadores rurales, de las mujeres, de las trabajadoras domésticas del hogar remunerado, de los sectores más vulnerables, de los jóvenes, de las personas con discapacidad. No han resuelto esas cosas y ahora dicen, bueno, pero ahora viene el nuevo problema, que es que las nuevas tecnologías van a hacer desaparecer algunos empleos y van a crear muchos más. Entonces, lo que quiero destacar especialmente es este tema. Porque, por ejemplo, ¿qué estamos haciendo en cada país para encarar el tema de las nuevas tecnologías? En Uruguay, por ejemplo, le hemos dado una computadora con acceso a Internet gratis a cada niño del Uruguay. Cada niño tiene una computadora gratis con acceso a Internet. Le estamos dando ahora una computadora a los jubilados. Tenemos una empresa estatal de telecomunicaciones, que es la más importante del país, que hoy es la primera que accede a tecnología 5G para los móviles. Y tenemos el país que es el primer exportador de software per cápita de América Latina, y el principal cliente de nuestras exportaciones es los Estados Unidos. Cuando hablamos de capacitación, estamos hablando de que, por ejemplo, en los últimos 5 años hemos multiplicado 6 por 6 los empresarios y trabajadores capacitados. Y ahora cada año estamos capacitando al 10% de la población en formación para adaptarse a las nuevas realidades de los nuevos empleos. Entonces creo que además de hablar tenemos que hacer, porque a veces estamos demasiado tiempo en tiempos de declaraciones y nos faltan hacer tiempos de concreciones, y creo que en ese mundo tenemos que avanzar. Y eso se debe hacer, y acá voy a su pregunta, con participación social en la elaboración y en la gestión de políticas públicas. Eso para nosotros es la mejor gobernanza. En Uruguay, este pequeño país del sur, una de las pocas democracias plenas del mundo y la primera de América Latina, nos enorgullecemos de que la administración de la seguridad social, la administración de la salud, la administración de la formación profesional, la administración de la salud laboral, sean organismos de gestión ejecutiva tripartita y que tengamos negociación colectiva universal de salarios y condiciones de trabajo para todos los trabajadores públicos y privados del país. Esos son los caminos para nosotros de participación, de gobernanza, para encarar los nuevos desafíos del trabajo y del futuro del trabajo.
Thank you very much, Minister Muro. So again, coming back to ensuring that as we design the responses to the governance processes, that we're designing them with social partners as part of the dialogue, ensuring that input is being put in, but also that the debate is robust, so what comes through on the other end is reflective of a more comprehensive society. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Madame Greenspan, because I think you might have views on that, but I'd like to test some of the comments with Mr. Vicentini as well. Governance. How do we ensure that we use our governance processes together with social partners in a way that's really going to enable positive social transformation? Your views on the governance process?
Well, there are two remarks made by Christine and Rebecca that really struck me. The first one is what Christine said, that trade unions, but I think all of us, not only trade unions, don't have to be scared by change, but have to manage change. And the second observation is that we should move from a purely compensative approach, so compensing the losers, to a more proactive approach in a way that we can design a better future for all.
Right.
I think these are the two fundamental principles at the basis of a good governance to manage transition. But of course, for a governance to be effective, a governance has to provide solutions to the problems that I mentioned before. The two categories of workers I mentioned have different needs, but in some cases also common problems. First of all, they need to be provided with the right to lifelong learning and to be upskilled to face the challenges. Second, they have to have a real access to universal social protection systems that can protect them from shocks that happen in the economy, but at the same time can also make their transition smoother. But third, and I emphasize already this point, all this doesn't work if there is not a clear strategy in place for quality job creation.
Yeah.
We need to create new and more jobs to compensate those that are going to be destroyed. And Christine Lagarde said very clearly, to do all this, governments in particular, but not only governments, also employers and workers, will need a lot of money in the next few years, a lot of money. And it's clear that if we continue only with austerity policies, with budget constraints, and with cuts in social protection systems, there is no chance that this kind of stupid, blind governance will help us, in address this problem. And there is a very last element that has to be considered, and is the fact that even if we fix all this, there is still an emergency in terms of low wages and wage inequalities in our labor markets. There are too many workers, especially those affected by transition, that don't earn enough to make a living, to pay social contribution to have a pension at the end of their career, and to make sure that their skills are used properly in the labor market. So the wage issue is crucial, and the only way to address the wage problem is to have proper social dialogue and proper collective bargaining in place in each and every country in the world. And this is not the case yet. There is a public governance, what the governments do, but there is also what the social partners are able to do via collective bargaining. Our capacity to deliver is fundamental, but we need help, we need support. At the same time, we need also obstacles to be removed. I mentioned before the competition law. The competition law considers that when a self-employed worker joins a union and goes into collective bargaining rounds, this self-employed worker is creating a cartel. Until we eliminate the stupid concept that trade unionism, organizing, and collective bargaining are a cartel, there is no chance, to change the governance. I think these are elements that can really make a difference, and it depends on all of us, on Pavel, on myself, on the governments, on all the people that can contribute to really turn the governance in the right way and go for a better future for all.
So a common theme is coming through across the voices of the panelists, that governance for governance sake doesn't change anything. That governance has to be governance for change's sake, for action, to move from statements to implementation, as Minister Muro has shared. Madam Greenspan, I'd like your final comments on this before I go to the audience very quickly. A quick thoughts from you on governance. I saw you nodding quite a bit as Mr. Vicentini was sharing some of the key issues we need to focus on. From your perspective, how do we make sure that governance, including the work alongside with social partners, really lead us from our aspirations to actually a realization of those aspirations?
Yes, I think that is very, very important what has been said. But in a way, we need to move from a negotiating scheme to a scheme that will mean more dialogue and coordination too. And I think that that's a difference for the new world. We need to coordinate more, workers and business and government. We need more dialogue to understand what are the challenges that we are facing. So it's not only about negotiation that we need, but it's also about coordination and dialogue. I think that that's one thing. Second, I think that all the parts of the dialogue, governments, business, and trade unions, have to change themselves. I think that trade unions have to include more voices of the horizontal, in a horizontal way, because those workers that are digital workers or workers from the platform can also come to a more voice and bargaining power status. And I think that there is movement in that direction, and I've seen several examples, but I think that has to be strengthened to be more inclusive also in each of the part of the dialogue. I think that businesses have to be more inclusive too. They need to invest much more in their workers. I think that the model of buying talent outside your business and not investing in the workers in your business is also dying out. And I think that is very important that they understand that the wealth won't come only from the capital, it will come mainly from the talent. And I think that governments too, governments too, in the sense that they will need to bring together for universal social protection, but especially for lifelong training, they will have to bring together the ministers of labor and education because they don't talk to each other. And many of the proactive policies that we are talking about are ill-designed for the new world. And we need to open up. We need to change the way in which we see the policies for the labor market, especially because people don't know how the world will look like. They don't know what are the jobs that are in the market. We need to make what we call in these discussions like a Google Maps for the labor force. You need to know where you are, what are your skills, and know where you want to go, because really you need the information to do that and help to do that.
So on the note of Google Maps, I think it's a good place to navigate our way back to the audience. Now, I made a promise when we started this conversation. I said I'd open up the floor to take some questions. We are really, really out of time, but I am not going to renegade on my promise. I'm going to ask that I'm going to take one question from a representative of employers. I'm going to take one question representing workers. I'm going to take one question from a government, and time permitting, I'll take a question representing young people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, again, I humbly request and remind you, may you please make your questions sharp, short, concise, and to the point. If you go beyond this request, I will interject and I will stop you. So let's start off on a good note and close off on a good note as well. All right. I'd like a representative from the workers first. Yes, sir. So I can't see your name, but I think you can please go ahead. So we've got a question from the workers, and I'm going to come to the employers next. So, sir, please go ahead. Short and sharp, and please indicate to whom you'd like to pose your question.
So my name is Plamen Dimitrov. I'm honored to be a vice president of this conference on behalf of the workers. Actually, the question is for all participants, if they can answer. And this is about the financing. Luca said that we need money. For all these transitions, social protection schemes, we need money. 0.23% of the of the global GDP is needed. 0.23% of global GDP is needed for all worlds to reach social protection floors. Recommendation to this House. IMF, Lagarde is left, but actually IMF said 10% of the global GDP is actually missing or losing in tax havens. See, there's a simple question. How we can fill this gap? To take some of this 10% from tax haven and to put this in at least social protection floors, and then go further to build up universal social protection, since this centenary conference is asking for 3U, universal lifelong learning rights, universal labor guarantee, and universal social protection. That's all. If you do this, then the people will be much more safe for next 20 years.
So that's more of a comment and so not so much of a question, but we'll see if we get an opportunity to get the panelists to weigh in on your comments. Thank you very much for that, sir. So let's get a voice from the employers. Is there a hand from the employers who would like to ask a question or to make a comment? I'm going to go once, going twice, going thrice. Mr. Mdwaba, all right. Sir, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to ask a question, it's just that I can't see any of my colleagues. So I did the twice was because I was checking the room. I don't even have a question, actually. So it's just to create balance. You know, we are a balanced house. So all I'm going to ask is that it would be great, I think, from everybody that's speaking to us today, and for which you thank you so much, to really talk to us on how we can find ways of reinforcing the business climate, the business environment. How do we do that? Because there's a need to do that. Rebecca, I think, touched on it a bit, but if we could speak a little bit more on that, I would be appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So comment/question around reinforcing the business climate. Thank you, Mr. Mdaba. So let's go to the voice of government. Is there a question coming from any of the governments this afternoon? I'm going to go once, twice, and I'm going to close the opportunity. All right, so I'm going to now open a final opportunity to a young person. We had a fantastic contribution this morning from a young person, and I'm going to ask her to pose a question to this panel as well. Ms. Maki, please go ahead.
I would like to make a comment, actually. I felt like adding to the discussion. First, I would like to repeat that I'm here speaking on behalf of the United Nations Major Group on Children and Youth, which is the General Assembly mandated and the official platform for the engagement of youth in processes related to sustainable development and intergovernmental processes. So I would like to speak about three main transitions that we need to be taken into consideration today. So first, we need to transition from a carbon economy to a green economy. We need to be speaking about green jobs, because a job is not decent if it's not green, just like one of the colleagues at the major group said. So we also need to transition from the economic systems that caused the conflicts in the first place, so we can start a real transition from war to peace. So not just the economic systems have caused conflicts in the first place, but also conflicts have left a huge impact on youth transitions, starting with the obstacles to the right to education, of course, but also by putting them in front of two pathways, either informal labor or violence and extremism. So we need to dismantle the war economy, as the young people are now being integrated in the war economy, especially in regions like my region, the Arab region, before we speak about sustainable transitions to decent jobs. We also need to ensure a meaningful transition to open, democratic, inclusive power structures based on equity of access and universality, which also includes the transition from authoritarianism to democracy. Now, the scope of challenge tells us that we no longer can rely on the limited and targeted interventions. We need to start thinking about restructuring and reshaping our economies and trying to bring real change. We need education that is valued as public good and oriented towards sustainable development and human rights. We need a new economic system that is not based on austerity measures that involve limiting the expansion of the economy and the creation of jobs and social protection.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a big comment. And I think one that has multiple layers. I'm going to hope that the panelists are going to be able to respond to these. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we've had is really 3 comments. And I'd say 3.5 because of the comprehensive contribution from Ms. Maki. There's a question about financing. So say that if all we need is 0.23%, why aren't we getting it done? There's a comment around how do we begin to reinforce the business environment? Because we can't have this conversation in the absence of actual businesses that are actually able to open up the job opportunities that we speak about. And finally, there's a comment around maybe our conversation is limited and needs to be broader and look at restructuring broadly, the restructuring of jobs as we know them, the restructuring of economic systems, the restructuring even of governance systems to bring about a better world. So I'm going to give each of the panelists literally 1 minute at most to respond to any of the questions that resonates both with you. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Vincentini. Of the comments that have been shared on the floor, is there one that you'd like to just respond to very quickly?
Well, let's respond about money. I think Christine Lagarde has replied partially to the question of Plamen, because she clearly mentioned taxation. Fair taxation means stopping tax evasion, tax fraud, having equality in taxation, and this can reinforce public budgets. But then she mentioned also public debt. Public debt is not only a bad word, can also be something very positive if it is channeled to productive investment. But there is a third dimension that was missing regarding money, and is fair wages. Having fair wages makes our social protection system sustainable, but also increases productivity. And so to some extent replies also to the question of the gentleman in front of me. Creating a better business environment means also having fair wages for raising productivity, and having decent wages means also having decent jobs. And this is the best way to include the young people in the labor market, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vincentini. Now, to the rest of the panel, that is the model we're going to follow in terms of the short response. I'm reducing your 1 minute to 30 seconds. Thank you for setting the example there. I'm going to come to Mr. Pavel next. In 30 seconds, what would you like to weigh in on the comments that were shared from the floor?
Well, I would like to respond to the young people, mainly on kind of different restructuring, governance. I think that, we've heard from Madame Lagarde, no one fits all. But some people think that some people think that we need to get back to some vox populi and bring the easy solutions to the world. And that's just not the case. We need to not only have evidence-based, but we have a more evidence-based policies, because we have so much complexity that we need to try very hard to get the solutions. And we need some of them to be global, including the universal standards. And here I'm very happy to be in ILO to say that we need some standards, because some of the solutions need to be global.
So the solutions need to be global. Ms. Bewa, in 30 seconds, what would you like to weigh in on from the comments from the floor?
I think there is a piece regarding youth or participation that I would like to very quickly build on. I look at as a three-pronged approach where we need to look at young people aspiration, we need to look at young people rights, and we need to look at young people meaningful participation. And very quickly, what do I mean? We need to make sure that we protect the rights of the people that we serve, mainly young people.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that when we talk about meaningful youth participation, it's a youth-led, youth-owned, youth-driven approach that definitely makes sure that young people are part of the solution, from designing, implementing, accountability, but also making decisions about money, where the money is going. And finally, because we don't have enough time, when we also talk about participation, we need to look at young people who are driving the change, young people in trade union, young people in employer association, young professional. And I think those approach will work. And the third leg of that three-pronged approach is multi-sectoral collaboration. Each agency here, each stakeholder here should work toward having a clear mainstream youth engagement strategy in the program.
Okay, youth engagement strategies across the board. Thank you very much, Ms. Bewa. Ms. Elasos, 30 seconds.
Yeah. I want to also to address the taxation, because I think that's a very important point. You have to have international cooperation in order to tax multinational companies, and you have to avoid tax competition between companies. And I think the biggest transition, in Norway at least, the last decades have been when you got all the women into the labor market. And that was impossible if you didn't have public finances in order to pay for preschools, in order to have welfare systems that made women come into work. And that has paid off many times, I would say.
All right, thank you very much. So, Madame Greenspan?
Well, I would like to address the question about green jobs and the importance of investing in new markets.
Yeah.
Because I think something that Christine said before, many of the money is going to the things that already exist, to the assets that already exist, elevating the price, but not creating new opportunities and not doing job creation. And I think that we need incentives for a job creation and investing in new ideas and new markets. And if we don't do that, so we won't have the part of the demand on jobs, on new wealth being created in new forms. Green jobs, blue jobs, and orange jobs. Now economy has colors.
Now the economy has colors: green jobs, blue jobs, and orange jobs. Final word from Minister Moreau to take us home. In 30 seconds, what would you like to weigh in on from the floor?
En primer lugar, yo creo que todos los países del mundo, aún los más pobres, tienen recursos para garantizar los pisos de protección social. Todos los países del mundo gastan en cualquier cosa y muchas veces no toman las decisiones políticas para garantizar los pisos de protección social y tienen fondos. En segundo lugar, sobre cómo reforzar el ambiente empresarial, lamento que se haya retirado el representante. Creo que tenemos que seguir en este camino de diálogo, de negociación y de construcción colectiva, en ese camino. Sobre el planteo que hizo la joven, que mucho destacamos su presencia aquí, de Naciones Unidas. Miren, perdonen que vuelva a ser el ejemplo de este pequeño país del sur. Nosotros no tenemos ni petróleo, ni gas, ni diamantes. Pero hace 2 años ya que estamos exportando energía renovable producto del sol, del aire y del viento, porque hemos logrado que toda la electricidad del país se produzca con energías renovables y ya hace 2 años que estamos exportando. Se puede hacer. Es lo mismo las decisiones que hay que tomar para la transición democrática. Dejémonos de hablar de democracia y tomemos las medidas para que efectivamente todos los países del mundo, como compromiso inmediato, transitemos hacia sistemas democráticos cada vez más perfectos, porque eso también es posible. Y lo sabemos fundamentalmente aquellos países que, como el Uruguay y muchos de América Latina y del mundo, hemos sufrido salvajes dictaduras.
Thank you very much, Minister Maro. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears that we are closing this conversation on a direct challenge. We need to do more talking, but at some point we need to stop talking. We need to decide, we need to find the courage to decide, and we need to find the courage to act. May I please give a round of applause to my panelists this afternoon. Thank you. Okay, end of session.